Hi, and welcome to Philosophy with Phil, with me, Phil Cohen. Apologies in advance, the heating's packed up in the office and we're all absolutely freezing, so we're going to sort of muddle through with this, but yeah, there'll be a lot of rubbing of hands, I'm afraid, through this video because my fingers are coming off. Anyway, for the next videos, I wanted to look at Judaism, take a step back and look at Judaism from a philosophical point of view, from two perspectives. To look at Judaism as a religion internally, how we view Judaism, and we'll be looking at that in four parts, looking at Torah-based Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, halachic legalistic Judaism, and mystical Judaism. And in the second part, we'll be looking at Judaism from the outside. What contributions Judaism has made as a religion to civilization as a whole, to those outside of the faith. So as I say, for this video, and there'll be two, for this video and the second video, we'll look at Judaism, what Judaism means to Jews internally. And as I say, the third video we'll be looking at Judaism externally. And in this first video, we're going to take the first two parts of what I said, Torah-based Judaism, as in the written Torah, the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, and rabbinic Judaism, as in the oral tradition, the written Torah and the oral tradition. Starting with the Torah, learning Torah in itself is crucial as a crucial part of Judaism. We value education. We've democratized education. It's not like it's written in Latin so only the clergy can study it. We actively encourage learning for all, at whatever level, through whatever means. And we actively engage in ways, any which way we can, to disperse Torah, not in a proselytizing way, but in an engaging way as best we can, to open it up to others. And with each innovation in technology that we've had, right through from the printing press, right through to the internet, social media, and YouTube, we've always been trying to use technology as a tool for spreading Torah to those that would otherwise not be able to access it. In fact, the teaching of Torah and the learning of Torah is a central part of one of the main paragraphs of prayer that we read twice a day, the Shema. V'shinanton levanecha, we say, that you should teach your children. And it's important that we give our children the opportunity to find out about their heritage and be able to study it further, to know what's being handed on to them and to know what they're a part of, both historically and through the rest of their religion. For this section, I wanted to emphasise, to talk about the centrality, not just of learning Torah, but of the revelation of Torah at Mount Sinai. Before that, Judaism was much more of an abstract, contemplative religion. If we look at the way Abraham, Isaac and Jacob practiced their religion, we see that they prayed, they meditated. There is some evidence that there are some commentaries that say they studied Torah, but the Torah that they studied would have been very different to the one we study today. It wouldn't have been the Chumash, certainly, but it would have been more of the Kabbalistic, mystical writings that we have in Judaism, some of which are still in existence today. But we see that the religion after Sinai takes on much more of a legalistic, structured, prescriptive format. Why was the revelation at Sinai important? Well, firstly, it was direct revelation from God en masse. God communicating to his people. God, an infinite being, creating to physical mortals. And not only communicating to people directly, but communicating to more than one person. Many religions claim to have prophets that experienced revelation on their own as individuals, but no existent religion, to my knowledge, can lay claim to a heritage that has in it mass revelation as we did at Sinai. Why? Because it's a very bold claim to make. It's one that is very easy to disprove, but one that wouldn't have lasted as long as it has had it not been a verifiable truth. The other importance of Sinai is that on the one hand it set boundaries. It represented a break from the past, a break from the experiences that the children of Israel would have had in slavery in Egypt, and from what their perceptions of the religion practiced by their distant ancestors would have been, and a start of the new. In fact, one of the first commandments the children of Israel are given at Mount Sinai is to build a fence, funnily enough. But not only that, there was a positive direction. It gave this bunch of slaves, if you like, some positive direction. It talked about a temple, a mishkan, a tabernacle, and gave them and discussed agricultural cycles for when they would come to the land of Israel. Let's not forget, this is a people that were in the middle of a desert here, and they're being told about what life's going to be like when they come to the promised land. So Torah learning and Torah study is central to Judaism, but we're not literalists. In fact, we discourage literalism, if such a thing exists. The Torah can only be understood, the written Torah can only be understood in the context of an oral tradition as well. This came to a fore, or was at the times of the temple, the build up to the destruction of the temples, where the rabbis were keen to pass on the tradition that they could see being radically changed by the absence of a temple. And so the decision was made to write down the oral tradition, as contradictory as it may sound, so that it could more easily be passed on and spread and communicated clearly. Nonetheless, there were those that splintered off at that time and chose to stick to the written Torah. But one can see how difficult their religion became to implement. Yes, the Mishnah as it became, and then later the Talmud, was a way of the rabbis stamping their authority on the people, especially with the schisms that there were with the Sadducees versus the Pharisees and so on. But it is what we have today as the first step towards a more broader explanation of the laws of the religion versus the stories of the Torah. It should be emphasised that the role of the rabbis in Judaism is a bit different to the way it is in other religions, in that rabbis are there to interpret law and to make decisions of legal practice, but not to serve as intermediaries between us and God. Yes, we go to holy rabbis for blessings, but that's because they're better at it than we are. That's not to say that we can't be just like them. The classic story that's often quoted in this regard is, it's given in the Talmud in Bava Metzia and other places in page 59. It's actually on the second page of 59, but I'd encourage you to look at the first page of 59 as well. That's also got some interesting tidbits on it as well. The story is called Achnai's Oven. And it's about, without going into the details, it's about a halachic legal decision about the status of a particular type of oven. And there were two dissenting views. There was Rabbi Eliezer, a prominent Tanna at the time, and he was countered by all of his colleagues, all of his contemporaries, the Chachamim, the sages of the day. Rabbi Eliezer, to add weight to his argument, invoked a number of miracles. He said God believes that what I say is correct, and if God believes it's correct, I will the walls of the Beis HaMedrash will cave in, and the river will stop flowing or change direction. And yet, despite these miracles actually occurring, the rabbis at the time countered him and said, "We still hold sway over your argument." Why? Because we are in the majority, and Jewish law holds that those in the majority overrule those in the minority. Now, some may find this strange. Surely, if God himself is saying that Rabbi Eliezer is correct, surely we should follow that ruling. But no, the truth is that we don't. We follow the sages because of this rabbinic principle. God handed the Torah down to us, to the rabbis to interpret, but to the Jewish people, and it's for us to take over and to implement. The fact that it may or may not be correct is almost irrelevant. As long as the rabbis can show consistent logic for their arguments, then we go with their interpretation. As a sort of ender, as a sort of end note to the story, it's asked in that bit of Talmud, what was God thinking at the time? It's a strange, abstract question to ask. And the Talmud tells us that God laughed with joy and pride that his children have defeated him. God says they're consistent. They've taken their rules and they've taken ownership of the Torah. Who could show much more what we call in Yiddish nachas than a parent acknowledging that? In the previous video, the first part of this section, we looked at the first two aspects, which were Torah Judaism, the written Torah, the Chumash, and the rabbinic Judaism, the oral tradition, the written tradition and the oral tradition. In this video, I want to start by looking at halachic Judaism. Halacha meaning the way to go, the path to follow, as in the legalistic aspect of Judaism. The Judaism is known for having many detailed and complicated laws, very intricate laws, about how to observe Jewish practice. This is so as to differentiate, to make a boundary, if you like, between just doing something and doing something the Jewish way. So, for example, not long ago we've had the festival of Hanukkah. And as many people will know, we light a menorah, we light candles on a menorah. But what is the difference between lighting a candle, which anyone can do any day of the week, any time of the year, and lighting Hanukkah candles? Well, there are specific times, specific place, specific shape of the candelabra that we use. There's how long the lights have got to last, what materials we can use to light, what fuel we can use, and there are various intricate laws about what makes the bare minimum of lighting the Hanukkah candles. And as I say, what point is it at which we're not lighting candles? We're not lighting candles anymore. We're lighting Hanukkah candles. What's that boundary? And that's what Halacha teaches us. It's a way of showing what God wants of us, what he expects of us. Yes, as a minimum, and obviously in many cases we can go above and beyond that and embellish it and make it beautiful and not stick to the bare minimum. But so that we know that firstly what God expects of us. And secondly, yes, there are times in life where we are pushed under extenuating circumstances, and we need to know what the bare minimum is so that we can do that and still fulfill the mitzvah, the obligation that we have. People find it very difficult when learning about halacha to see this as a way of coming closer to God. Why? Because we're often talking about physical things that don't, to us, have any significance. So yes, we can use oil, we can use the same vial of oil on one day and it's meaningless, and on the other day it's Hanukkah lights. And to us there's no difference between those two, seemingly, from their appearances, from face value at least anyway. And yet, in Jewish law, there is a tremendous amount of difference. Because we're using mundane objects, seemingly mundane objects, in the service of God, that has been known to put people off. The detail and the complexity of the laws is often brought into ridicule by people. It often makes me laugh when we see Christmas decorations, for example, to make a distinction. And we see people just putting up a tree with various decorations, and we know that if it were Jewish law that obligated to do that, there'd be a certain minimum height for the tree and a placement, and the minimum number of decorations and the species of the tree, and so on and so forth. But if we look back to the very first laws given to the children of Israel, as I said in the previous video, when the children of Israel came out of Egypt from their enslavement, the religion underwent this dramatic shift from being a more abstract religion to a more structured, legalistic religion. And we see that in the commandments for the Paschal sacrifice, the lamb or the goat they had to bring just before they left Egypt. The laws there are very detailed. If I'm not mistaken, there's 14 or 15 very specific laws that are given about this sacrifice explicitly in the Torah, which is quite unusual for the Torah to be that detailed. The reason being because the Torah wanted to say, this is how things are going to change, and this is how things are going to be different from now on in. Jewish halacha is structured, as I say, it's rigorous, and it's consistent. There is meaning in the structure. If, for example, we have to light 8 candles, there's a reason why we have to light 8 candles, and why the number 8. And those principles, those structures hold true throughout. We are fearless in the way we apply our logic, even if it takes us to places that seem very strange and bizarre, and mean that we make unnecessary, counterintuitive extrapolations. Yes, there are seeming superficial inconsistencies in the Torah, which seem to break the mold. But in fact, what we do is we actually learn things, new things from those breaks with the pattern, and those inconsistencies actually teach us more and are there to learn from. We don't believe, even little letters, even odd letters, seemingly superfluous words or letters or phrases in the Torah or repetitions are there to teach us something else. And you will often see commentators like Rashi and many others trying to pick up on those and trying to derive laws from those seemingly superfluous letters, words or phrases. Just to end this section by talking about halachic derivation, and this can be quite a contentious, controversial subject. Technology changes, and applications of halacha need to adapt to that. So, for example, we now have tablets, iPads, Amazon Kindles, and other things. And we need to know how the laws that we've applied up until now, about writing, for example, and electricity, can be applied to these new technologies. And we are able to go back to founding principles that ultimately go all the way back to the Torah, believe it or not, that we can use to derive laws that can be applied to these things, to these situations. So be it microwave ovens, the printing press, other technological innovations are still the application of halacha is still based on principles that can be traced back thousands of years. But on top of the halacha, we also have tradition, we have custom. And these are things that have come into being through political circumstances, historical circumstances, geographical, local circumstances that have influenced the religion. And those, although not strictly mitzvahs, but have become part of the Jewish tradition and part of the centrality, the corpus of Jewish law. Many people have sought to overrule these traditions simply because the reasons that they have come about have no longer existing. As I say, maybe the political circumstances, the historical circumstances, or the geographical circumstances are no longer in existence. But we have this principle that we still hold by them because they were put into place by sages that were much wiser and much more knowledgeable than we are. And so there is very much a reticence amongst the Orthodox community to leave aside these traditions, even though they're not part of Jewish central law. But it is important nonetheless, when studying Jewish law, to understand the difference between a halacha, a law that we are obligated in, and a custom. And as I say, there are times when we are pushed under emergency circumstances where one is able to treat a custom with much more leniency than an actual halacha. But there are things that we have taken on in Judaism that are just there because of the Jewish tradition, the heritage that we have, and that they've lasted as long as they have and supported us through our journey through history. And yet, yes, they're not part of Jewish law, but we do them anyway, and it's the way the religion and modern day religion has come to be. It's easy to question these, and it's easy to lay them aside. But nonetheless, we have consensus that we need to follow. And there will be rabbis that come up in each generation that are universally accepted as being the legalistic, halachic authorities of the time, who will guide us into the application of these customs, even though we are obligated to take their word for it, even though they may say that the legalistic basis may have changed, or circumstances may have changed. Lastly, I'd like to end talking about mystical Judaism. Mystical Judaism, basically, broadly speaking, comprises of two parts. This is the way God, as an infinite being, relates to the physical world, and us in particular, through things like the act of creation, the 7 days of creation outlined in the first chapter of Genesis, of Bereshit, the role of angels as messengers of his powers, of God's powers, the soul and the afterlife, and so on. So that's one part, how God relates to us. And the other part is the mirror image of that, how we, as finite beings, can relate to God through prayer, through meditation, through use of the Hebrew language, which was created by God as a way of us relating to Him, and through the mitzvot, through the performance of Torah, and from the learning of Torah and the mitzvot, and the mitzvahs. In many ways, it's a throwback to pre-Sinai Judaism. It's a more purer form of Judaism. It's the sort of Judaism that Abraham, Isaac and Jacob would have recognised. As I said in the previous video, their Judaism would have been much less based on the texts that we have today, because the written text was given at Sinai. But it would have been more of a contemplative religion involved with Kabbalistic writings. This is most profoundly shown by the Hasidic movement, which came about in the sort of 17th, 18th centuries, where people were finding it more and more difficult to study Torah. And there was a polarisation of Jews into the intelligentsia brought about that were influenced by the Enlightenment and the scientific revolutions that were going on at the time, that were going off to study on the one hand, and on the other hand, those that felt that they were if you like of a better word, the peasants, the common folk. And Hasidus sought to, as I say, bring people back to classic Judaism, what Judaism is about: acts of kindness, helping others, charity, not just with money but with deeds and with personality traits, and helping others, and showing that through that one is able to emulate the way God behaves to us. God is kind to us and bestows acts of kindness on us, and in that way come closer to God as a result. So that concludes the first section, where we looked at Torah Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism as in oral tradition, and Halachic and mystical Judaism. In the next video, as I say, we'll spread the net further and look at the contribution Judaism has made to society as a whole. Thanks for watching. Hi, and welcome back to Philosophy with Phil, with me, Phil Cohen. This is the third and final video, where we're looking at what is Judaism, and this will be the beginning and end of the second section, where we're looking at Judaism as we would like it to be perceived, I guess, to the outside world, those outside of the faith. And the contribution that Judaism has made to civilization, broader civilization. To do this, I'm going to cheat and pinch the answer from a brisa, which is first quoted in a book called Torah Kahanim, which is a commentary on the third book of the Torah, the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra, and it appears in the fourth chapter. It's chapter 4, Midrash 12. It is. We're also going to cheat because we're going to rumble it together with some other commentaries that have embellished, added in more different versions of this brisa, and we're going to sort of jumble it all together and treat it as one big lump. It'll become clear in a minute, hopefully. The brisa asked by asking a fundamental, very interesting question. It says, what is the most important verse in the Torah? What verse in the Torah encapsulates Judaism or summarises Judaism more than any other? And the two opinions are given, but as I say, later embellishments have added in more, and we'll go into those as well. The first opinion is from Rabbi Akiva, who famously quotes Vayikra, Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 18. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your fellow, your friend, your neighbour as yourself. Judaism is about getting on with others, being kind to others. It's about emulating God, who is kind to us, and by that way coming close to Him, to God. In fact, the Parsha, the Sedra, that deals with interpersonal laws, civil laws, honesty, morality, and so on, is called Parshas Kedoshim in the Torah, which means holy, We come to holiness not just through meditation and prayer and spiritual endeavours, but through physical acts of kindness. The founding father of our religion, Abraham, was the paradigm of kindness. He is known as being the paradigm of chesed, loving kindness. Even to non-believers, by the way. In fact, Judaism is one of the few religions that doesn't seek to go out and proselytise and convert others from other faiths. We certainly don't do it forcibly, and we certainly don't do it through violence. We will, though, try and help others within the faith to come closer to their heritage and to understand, have a better appreciation and understanding of what's been passed on to them. But Judaism, how could I put it? It's about being nice to people. It's a nice religion. It's about helping people. And it's not all the bad stuff. The second opinion given is Ben Azai. He quotes from Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 5, the first verse 1. This is the book of the generations of Adam. On the day that God created man, he made him in his image. Man is made in God's image. And this is a kind of similar point to the point that we just made with Rabbi Akiva. Man has dignity. We are all equal. We are all equally made in the image of God. That's not saying we have divinity. We're not saying that man is God. But even non-believers of Judaism, those outside of the faith of Judaism, are treated with dignity. We have laws of Judaism brought to the world, laws of how to treat slaves with dignity, how to establish families, and laws about families, and yes, about divorce as well. In Judaism, we have justice systems that that emphasise the rule of law, not just the whim of a king, but Judaism separates power from the judiciary and from religion. So we have kings and we have prophets and priests, incidentally, as well. So you have situations we have stories about Saul, the king, and Samuel, the prophet. Yes, they would consult with each other, but they wouldn't necessarily. They would work together, but the power was kept separate. And often, Samuel and then later Nathan and King David, Nathan and Samuel would hold their respective kings to account and castigate them when they made mistakes. I think I mentioned this in a previous video. The interesting law that I pull out from this is that we are forbidden from cursing the deaf. So even if we're doing something that has no consequences, someone who can't hear us, and by the way, we extrapolate that to someone who can't hear us, someone who's in another room or in another country or something, saying something bad about somebody else or cursing somebody else, even if they can't hear us, is inherently wrong. So if an act is wrong, it's wrong, regardless of what the consequences might be or how significant those consequences might be. The next verse given, the next opinion given, is a rabbi called Ben Zoma, and he quotes the famous Shema prayer. Not the prayer. The verses in the Torah, which are in Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 6, verse 4 and onwards. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. God is one. Judaism is the first monotheistic religion, and monotheistic religions, the other monotheistic religions have been known to have sprout off from religion. We have Islam and Christianity, which openly admit to being derivations of Judaism. I have in a previous video about what is God talked about what monotheism means within the Jewish context and what we mean by God in Judaism. But God is the single source of power and responsibility. It's not like we create another God every time something goes wrong and we have to, and he can pass the buck, so to speak. We have one God that we are all equally able to relate to. And the way we relate to God is the way we define ourselves as a religion. We call ourselves Jews from the word Judah, from the tribe of Judah, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. It means to give thanks, or to acquiesce, or to sublimate ourselves to, subjugate ourselves to. Our duty in our life defines who we are, and our relationship with God defines our religion. Interestingly, though, the last opinion gives a very ritualistic verse. Reb Shimon ben Pazi says, he quotes from Exodus, Shemos, chapter 29, verse 39, and talks about the ritualistic aspects of the temple service. And this is what I'd like to end with. I've spoken about halachic Judaism being important, and Torah being important, and ritual being important, what we do, the details. But it's about the day-to-day stuff. It's about the mundane stuff. It's the way we behave to others. It's the way we go through our day that is important in Judaism. We do have people that go and set themselves up aside for studying, but Judaism is about doing and about being and about day-to-day life in the workplace, in the office, in the marketplace, in the home, how you behave with your children, how you raise a family. It's about the mundane, everyday stuff. It's not about the esoteric, abstract stuff. And that's what I think, for me, is what we've given to the world. That there is a religion that God does care about what we do in our private lives, what we do behind closed doors, and how we behave to each other, even when that person can't hear you. Shabbat Shalom, and thanks for watching.